I never imagined that my life would take such a drastic turn. Growing up, I believed that family was unbreakable, a constant in a world full of uncertainties. I envisioned a simple life, working hard, raising children who admired me. But life doesn't always go as planned. My marriage began to crumble, and I didn't see the signs. By the time I realized I had been betrayed by the person I trusted the most, it was too late. Looking back, it's surreal how quickly things fell apart. Carrie and I seemed happy once, building a life together, making plans for a bigger house after Jimmy was born. But I was too busy with work to notice the cracks. When I finally did, Carrie had already decided to leave, and I was left picking up the pieces. Sitting by the bay window, I watched the neighborhood kids playing outside. I saw Jimmy, my son, joining their game, and he gave me a smile. That brief moment was all I had left of being part of his life. If Carrie knew I was nearby, she would drag him home, but Jimmy always found a way to say hello. It hit me hard. My son, just 10 years old, was old enough to understand what had happened between his mother, me, and Greg. The hardest part was how Carrie told me she was leaving. It was a regular Tuesday. "Jim, I'm pregnant," she said. I hugged her, overjoyed, until I noticed she was crying. She wasn't hugging me back. Then she said, "It's not yours. I'm moving in with Greg." Shocked, I left the house and went to Greg's place. I hit him. He called the police, and I spent the night in jail. Carrie got a restraining order, and a week later, I received the divorce papers. I never even got to ask her why she cheated. The game outside ended, and Jimmy blew me a kiss. I pointed to the mailbox where I had left a phone for him. He wasn't supposed to have one until he was 12, but I wanted to annoy Carrie. My sister agreed to take the blame. Inside was a note, "Jimmy, I love you more than anything. You have unlimited data so you don't need Wi-Fi, and I've left a gift card for games. All of Billy Joel's music is downloaded. Enjoy it. I'm sorry for messing up, but I miss you every day. My number is saved as Mike. You can text me, but don't call. This is how it has to be for now. I love you." Jimmy smiled, crumpled the note, and grabbed the phone. "I love you," he shouted as he ran off. Billy Joel was our thing. Jimmy pretended to hate his music, but I knew he liked it. He'd sneak lyrics into conversations to see if I noticed. Once, after getting a D on a test, Carrie said, "You're an A student." Without missing a beat, Jimmy replied, "I guess I think too much," quoting Billy Joel. I laughed, but Carrie didn't get the joke. It was our little connection. I worked as a mechanic for a construction company, fixing everything from cars to cranes since high school. It paid well, and I got winters off. Carrie was a teacher. We met at a country bar, hit it off, and 3 years later bought a small house, planning to move eventually. But in Carrie's version of moving, I didn't fit. I didn't know she was cheating until she told me she was pregnant with Greg's baby. Greg was disliked by most people, tolerated only because he brought expensive whiskey to parties. Somehow, Carrie was the exception, needing more than I could provide, despite my stable union job with benefits. Carrie never complained about money, we took trips, and she bought whatever she wanted. So it shocked me when she started belittling my work, calling me a funny little monkey. The first time was after I accidentally dirted her shirt, and from then on, it became her favorite insult. After Carrie moved in with Greg, our divorce was finalized. I gave Jimmy a secret phone to stay in touch, even though there was a restraining order. I violated it once at a barbecue when Greg made a rude comment about Carrie's pregnancy, and I punched him. Luckily, the neighbors backed me up, preventing my arrest. Still, the incident kept the restraining order in place. A month after giving Jimmy the phone, we texted each other daily, keeping things casual and never mentioning that I was his father. One night, Jimmy called me in a panic. Greg had hit Carrie and shoved him too. Without thinking, I ran to their house, ignoring the restraining order. I kicked the door open and saw Greg going after Jimmy while Carrie struggled on the floor. I shoved Greg outside, throwing him down the stairs. "Jimmy, call 911. I shouted. Carrie tried to speak to me, but I cut her off, telling her to focus on Jimmy. As I left, I remembered I wasn't supposed to be there, but before going, I kicked Greg again, something I was starting to enjoy. Greg's neighbor, Jackson, laughed as he watched, while his wife, Sia, went inside to help Carrie and Jimmy. Another neighbor kept an eye on Greg. "What happened, Jim?" Jackson asked as I sat on the grass, a bit away from the house. "Jimmy called for help," I said. "Greg hit Carrie and shoved him, so I ran over. I heard the shouting, but we didn't know it was this bad." "Fair enough," Jackson said with a laugh. "You didn't even get a chance to hit him, just shoved him out the door." We laughed until the police and ambulance arrived. Jackson offered to explain everything to the officers, reminding them I was keeping my distance because of the court order. "We all know you didn't deserve this," Jackson added. "Thanks, man," I said, as the police questioned Jackson, the neighbors, and a now conscious Greg. An officer handcuffed Greg, while another waved me over. "You're Jimmy's dad, right?" the officer asked. "Yes, sir," I explained what had happened as the ambulance took Carrie away on a stretcher and Jimmy, with a bandage on his forehead. "Is my son okay?" I asked. "They're checking him for a concussion, but he seems fine," the officer replied. "However, we may have to take you in for violating the restraining order." "I had to help Jimmy," I said firmly. The officer stepped away to check his radio, then returned. "Your ex-wife isn't pressing charges for violating the order, so you're free for now. But that could change if Greg files a complaint." I went home, hoping Jimmy was okay. For a brief moment, I wondered if Carrie would be fine too, but I pushed that thought aside. The next day, I called my lawyer, who advised me to avoid contact with Carrie or Jimmy. Later, my mom confirmed they were fine. Carrie had stayed in the hospital, and Jimmy was with her parents. A few days later, my lawyer called to say Greg had been denied bail, likely because Carrie was pregnant and Jimmy had been hurt. Surprisingly, Carrie's lawyer filed a request to lift the restraining order. A court date was set, and I couldn't wait to see Jimmy. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, Carrie called me several times, but I didn't answer to avoid jeopardizing the case. On the day of court, I cleaned up, bought a new suit, and shaved, wanting to make a good impression. The judge was thorough, asking tough questions about why I could see Jimmy now but not before. After everything was explained, she lifted the restraining order. As I left the courtroom, Carrie approached me. "Thank you for coming that night. If you hadn't, I don't think the police would have arrived in time. Greg could have killed me. I wasn't going to let my son get hurt," I said. She began to cry. "It's all my fault. None of this would have happened if it weren't for me." My lawyer came over, congratulating me on being able to see Jimmy again. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt like I was floating. Then I heard Jimmy shout, "Dad." I turned around, and he was already jumping out of Carrie's father's truck, running into my arms. I hugged him tightly until he asked me to let him breathe. Dan, Carrie's dad, walked up. "Sorry we're late. Traffic was terrible," he said. "No problem. I'm glad you brought him." "Where's Carrie?" I asked. "She ran off after court." "I think she's gone," Dan added. "Why don't you take Jimmy for the day? Maybe we can have dinner and catch up." I hesitated. "We don't have a visitation schedule yet." "She might not, I don't mind," I heard behind me. Turning around, I saw Carrie with tears streaming down her face. "Spend some time together," she said softly. "He can even stay the night if you want." "Can I?" Jimmy asked eagerly. Carrie nodded, and I thanked her, feeling a twinge of sympathy for her, though I wasn't sure why. Despite everything, a part of me still cared. With Jimmy out of school for the summer, I took time off work to be with him. Carrie had moved back in with her parents after leaving Greg. One day, when she went into labor, I asked if Jimmy could stay with me longer. His mother brought him over, and later I got a call from Dan. Jim, she had a baby girl. You should come see her. I don't care about her baby, Dan. Shut up and come. It's important, he insisted. Reluctantly, I took Jimmy to the hospital. He wanted to buy a teddy bear for his new sister, and I let him, though I still felt bitter. When we arrived, Dan and Jane greeted us, and I learned Carrie had named the baby Allison, after my mom. I walked down the hospital hallway and heard Carrie singing a lullaby she used to sing to Jimmy. It hit me hard. Entering the room, I was stunned to see that the baby had bright red hair, just like mine. Greg didn't have red hair, but I did. Carrie looked at me, tears streaming down her face. I think I made a mistake, Jim, she said. I couldn't handle it and walked out. Back in the waiting room, Jane said, "She's yours, Jim. You can see for yourself." "Prove it," I replied. Dan explained, "That's why you're here. They've ordered a DNA test. You just need to give a sample." I shook my head. "It won't change anything." She broke my heart. 3 days later, Jimmy asked, "Can we visit Allison today?" I hesitated, but he added, "You don't have to come. Just drop me off at Grandpa's house." I agreed, and then he asked, "Allison has red hair. Does that mean she's your daughter?" "I'll know soon," I said. "The DNA test results are due today." Jimmy looked sad and asked, "If she's your daughter, will you love her?" "I love you, and if she's mine, I'll love her too," I said. He paused and then asked, "And Mom? Will you love her again?" I laughed, pouring more coffee. "Your mom will love Allison no matter what." Without thinking, I added, "Your mom hurt me, Jim. She caused me the worst pain a wife can give her husband. She got pregnant and left me for someone else. The love I had for her is gone." Jimmy was quiet before admitting, "That wasn't the first time Greg hurt Mom." I was shocked. "What do you mean?" "I've heard him slap her before. They yelled a lot," he said, his voice trembling. A tear rolled down his cheek. "I'm so sorry, son. I didn't know." "Mom said he's not even half the man you are," Jimmy added. I hugged him, and we sat together. She didn't want to be married to a mechanic anymore. She wanted more, a bigger house, fancy cars. "That's stupid," Jimmy said, making me laugh. "Yeah, buddy. Adults make dumb choices sometimes." He smiled. "Don't forget your second wind, Dad." I raised an eyebrow. "What?" "You'll understand someday," he said, running off to get dressed. Later, we went to Carrie's parents' house. Jane opened the door holding baby Allison. "Hi, Jim. Any news from the lab?" "No," I replied, avoiding looking too closely at the baby. Jimmy eagerly asked, "Can I hold her, Grandma?" "Of course, but sit down first." "Babies are fragile," Jane said, smiling. Jimmy's excitement was obvious. Jane invited me in for coffee, but I declined. I didn't want to be near Carrie or the baby until I got the DNA results. Just then, my phone rang. It was the lab. "Mr. Spellman, we've confirmed a positive DNA match." I hung up before they could finish. Sitting on the porch swing, I stared into the distance. Carrie had been pregnant with my child when she left me for Greg. I felt like I couldn't breathe. After a while, Dan came out. "You okay, Jim?" "I'll never be okay," I said. "How could she do this to me? I loved her." Dan sat next to me silently before asking, "Was that the lab?" "Yes," I said, avoiding the truth. I wasn't ready to admit I had a daughter. Dan put a hand on my shoulder. Jim, it's obvious. Did you really need the test? I got angry. Yes. How could I trust that promiscuous woman you raised? I immediately regretted it. I'm sorry, Dan. I didn't mean that. Dan sighed. You're hurt. It broke my heart when you two split up. I love you like a son. I know, Dan. I'm just angry. She was pregnant with my baby when she left me for Greg. I don't know what to do. Dan hugged me. Call your parents. They need to meet their granddaughter. I will, I said, stepping back. But I can't stay. I can't face Carrie after what she's done. Dan patted my back. That little girl has a father, you. Don't forget that. I nodded. You're right. I just need time. Take your time, but eventually, you'll have to face it, Dan said. I called my mom. Hey, Mom, can you and Dad come over for lunch? Turns out Carrie's baby is your granddaughter. We'll be there right away, she said. After the call, I asked Dan, can I hold her? Dan smiled. Of course. I'll bring her with Jimmy. I sat back on the porch swing, feeling anxious and ready to leave, when Jane appeared with Allison. She handed her to me, and as soon as I held her, my heart melted. She was sound asleep. Jimmy came running over, excited. Isn't she pretty, Dad? She could be Batgirl for Halloween. I laughed. Sure, and you could be Batman, and she could be Poison Ivy. Allison woke up crying, and Jane stepped forward. She's probably hungry. Carrie appeared in the doorway. I'll take her. I'm breastfeeding and haven't pumped milk for a bottle yet. I kissed Allison's forehead and handed her back. Just as I was about to leave, my parents arrived. My mom rushed over, tears in her eyes. She's feeding, Jane said, hugging her. Come meet her. My dad chuckled. Your mom's been crying since we talked to you, Jim. As they went inside, my dad asked, well, Jim, do you think everything will be okay? Honestly, I don't know, Dad, I replied. Back at home, I tried focusing on yard work, but I couldn't stop thinking about Allison. Knowing she was mine changed everything. I realized I needed to talk to my lawyer about visitation rights for both kids, not just Jimmy. I'd have to pay more child support, but I didn't mind. After mowing the lawn, I went inside and started thinking about making the house childproof again. I had kept the safety gates and crib from when Jimmy was little. I realized I might need a bigger house. There wasn't enough space for Allison and Jimmy to share a room. While cleaning, I was surprised by how messy the house had become since Jimmy had come back. But tidying up felt good. I had just sat down on the patio with a beer when I saw my dad and Dan rounding the corner. Want a beer? I asked, handing them bottles. Dad laughed. We're not here for a heavy conversation, are we? Something like that, I murmured. You've been through a lot, Dad said. You've gone from being separated from Jimmy to finding out you're a father of two. Most men wouldn't handle it as well as you have. He grew serious. Jim, you're going to be this little girl's father, no matter what. I nodded, but I could see he was preparing for something. Have you thought about your relationship with Carrie? He asked. I laughed bitterly. There is no relationship, Dad. She left me for Greg. Do you think I'm just going to take her back like nothing happened? Are you crazy? Jim, it's not that simple, Dan said, trying to defend his daughter. Not a chance, Dan, I replied sharply. She thought Allison was Greg's, and that's why she went with him. Dan took a deep breath. She didn't know, Jim. If she had, really? I shouted. How could she even allow any doubt about who the father was? She betrayed me, broke my heart, and threw everything away. Allison being mine doesn't change that. We understand you're angry, Dad said gently. No, you don't understand, I replied. She wanted the lifestyle Greg offered, the fancy car, the vacations. She made her choice. Now she can't just come crawling back because things didn't work out with him. I stormed back into the house and locked the door behind me. I hated yelling at Dan and my dad, but I couldn't take it anymore. The conversation was over. Time passed without any word from Carrie or her parents. It was almost lunchtime, and I debated whether to call or just go pick up Jimmy. I didn't feel like going there, especially to face Carrie. Then I got a text from Jane, "We're taking Jimmy to Red Robin for dinner. You can join us and take him home from there." I figured Carrie and the baby wouldn't be there, who takes a newborn to a restaurant. So I decided to go. Jimmy would help keep things light. When I arrived, they were enjoying a tower of onion rings, which made me smile. Jimmy always insisted on onion rings when we went out as a family. "Hey, guys," I greeted, sitting down. Dinner went smoothly until after we ate. "Dad," Jimmy said, "we need a bigger house." I laughed. "I agree. You and your sister can't share a room when you visit." "That's not what I mean," he said. "Mom and Allison could live with us again. There's no going back to Greg's house," he assured me. "He's going to jail." Jimmy smiled. "Thank God. I miss my old room." Dan frowned. "Jimmy, your mom, Allison, and you are staying with us for now. She'll find a new place soon." Jimmy wasn't satisfied. "I want to stay with Dad." I tried to stay calm. "It's complicated. The judge gave custody to your mom. I'm lucky she let you stay with me these past few days." "That's not fair," Jimmy shouted. "Why do I have to suffer?" I looked at Dan and Jane, but they avoided my eyes. "It's not fair to me either," I said quietly. One day I had a family, and the next, I lost it all. Your mom told me she was pregnant with Greg's baby, and it crushed me. She made a mistake, Dad. She deserves a second chance. I shook my head. Jimmy, that song isn't about second chances, it's about not giving up. This is different. You're giving up. Jimmy shouted. You're not even trying. I took his hand. Son, I loved your mom, but she made her choice, and I can't take her back. Dan intervened. I think we should call it a day. It's been a long one for everyone. I agreed, and we left the restaurant. The drive home was quiet, but I could tell Jimmy was still upset. He longed for our family to be whole again. We had this conversation almost daily, his tone softened over time, but the sadness never left his eyes. 10 days after Allison's birth, Carrie showed up at my door. Hi, Jim. Can I come in? She asked. I called for Jimmy, who ran to her and hugged her. Hi, Mom. Where's Allison? She's with Grandma and Grandpa Spellman, she said, smiling. Oh, good. He ran off, leaving us alone. Are you here to take him home? I asked, bracing myself. No, Jim. I'm here to talk. I frowned but led her to the living room. Can I offer you something to drink? I asked awkwardly. No, thank you, she replied, sitting down. I never got to talk to you before the divorce because of that restraining order, she said. The one Greg pushed for, I replied sharply. She looked down. That was Greg's idea. He wanted revenge. Why? I asked, anger rising. For hitting him after he took my family, I added bitterly. I know, she whispered, and you didn't have to bring him to that barbecue. Maybe not, I admitted, but you didn't have to let him provoke me either. I only kicked him after he insulted me in front of Jimmy. You knew I'd be there, Carrie. You knew. Carrie looked away, guilt written all over her face. You know, Greg was in bad shape after that. You probably hurt him more than you realize, she said. I couldn't help but laugh, the sound bitter and harsh. The idea that I hurt Greg more than he hurt me, taking my wife and ruining my life, was absurd. Once I calmed down, I asked, "Get to the point, Carrie. What do you want?" She sighed. "I never stopped loving you, Jim." I froze. I was stupid. I made a mistake with Greg. I convinced myself I had to be with him because I thought the baby was his. I didn't even consider that Allison might be yours, she said, wiping away a tear. So you just left, without even talking to me? I asked. She nodded. I thought it was the only option. Greg convinced me we'd be fine together. I didn't realize how wrong I was until it was too late. I paced the room. You threw everything away, Carrie. We had a family. We were happy. I know, she whispered, her voice breaking. You didn't just ruin it, you destroyed it. You took my son, slapped me with a restraining order, and now you want a second chance. She started crying again. I'm sorry, Jim. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for another chance, for Allison and Jimmy. I shook my head. Carrie, we can't just go back to how things were. You broke my heart. We can be friends, but I can't take you back. She nodded sadly. I understand. I'm sorry for everything, Jim. She left with Jimmy that night. I sat by the window, reflecting on how my life had turned upside down. I should have been happy to have Jimmy back, but things were more complicated now with Allison. I loved her the moment I saw her, but Carrie's request for a second chance had thrown everything into chaos. My lawyer had already prepared a visitation schedule and a new support agreement for both kids, but I worried Carrie wouldn't cooperate. Her plea for a second chance was the only leverage she had, and I had just turned her down. Later, Jimmy came home and asked if he could stay with me instead of going back to his grandparents. I explained that the custody agreement gave his mom custody and there was nothing I could do. And Allison, he asked. We'll work that out soon. I want to see her as much as I can, just like I missed you, I said. Jimmy changed the subject, asking for pizza for dinner. He even suggested inviting Carrie and Allison, but I shook my head. I know what you're trying to do, Jimmy. It's not going to happen. Your mom and I aren't getting back together. He shrugged and ran off. Later, I took him to Dan and Jane's house and asked to see Allison. Dan led me to the room where Carrie was rocking the baby. I whispered, I just want to see her for a moment. Carrie replied coldly, take a good look, because soon you won't see her anymore. What? I asked, alarmed. It's simple, she said. If you don't give me a second chance, I'll make sure you never see Allison or Jimmy again. Just as I was about to yell, Dan put a hand on my shoulder. Don't say anything you'll regret or that she can use against you. I'm a witness here, and I won't let her do this. We'll find the best father's rights lawyer and fight this to the end. Carrie stood up, furious. If you keep interfering with my family, I'll cut you out of my life completely, and you'll never see your grandchildren again. Jane stormed in, livid. I heard everything on the baby monitor, Carrie. You can't blackmail him into taking you back. Don't start a fight you've already lost. Dan suggested moving the discussion to the kitchen, sensing I was about to explode. They left, giving me a moment alone with Allison. As I held her tiny hand, I nearly cried, unable to imagine life without her. In the kitchen, I overheard Dan and Jane scolding Carrie. Dan returned to reassure me. You're not alone, Jim. We'll fight this. I turned to Carrie. You made your choice. You divorced me. You have to live with that. With tears in her eyes, she said, I made a mistake. We can rebuild our family if you forgive me. The mistake was your affair that led to our divorce, I replied. She snapped, "If you hadn't been working so much and ignoring me, I wouldn't have ended up with Greg. You barely spent time with me." I was stunned. "Instead of talking to me, you ran to the guy next door. You left me thinking the baby was his." She turned away, but I pressed on. "You took my son, filed a restraining order because Greg told you to, and now you want to take my daughter too. We need to get along for the kids, but I can't be with you again." Carrie broke down, and Jane comforted her. I left with a nod, feeling exhausted. I hoped Carrie would do the right thing, but I knew I needed to call my lawyer on Monday. I opened a beer and realized it was time to move on. It was clear I wasn't going back to Carrie, blackmail or not. I needed to start dating again. Having been out of the dating scene for over a decade, I knew it would be a challenge, but I decided to give it a shot. After showering and calling an Uber, I looked at my outdated wardrobe. I called my sister, who used to help me pick clothes before Carrie came into my life. I settled on khaki shorts and a golf shirt, ironically, an outfit Carrie had bought me. Looking in the mirror, I noticed I was still in good shape, with a full head of hair and a rugged look from my stubble. With a stable job and money in the bank, I felt like a decent catch. I decided to go to a local sports bar, thinking it was a safer bet than a nightclub. At the bar, I ran into some old friends, Jack, Alan, and Chris. "Holy hell!" Jack shouted, drawing attention as he saw me. We hugged, and I felt a sense of camaraderie I had missed. Marriage and kids had made it hard to stay close to these single guys, but now things had changed. "What's new, guys?" I asked, signaling to the waitress for a drink. "Same old," Chris said. "I heard you got divorced." I nodded as the waitress handed me a glass. "Yeah, she tried to change things and left me. Now she wants me back." They all laughed, and Jack said, "So, you're here looking for a replacement before she hooks you again? Smart move." I chuckled. "No, I'm not going back. But I think it's time to start dating again." Alan grinned mischievously. "Well, Maddie's single now. Steve cheated on her, and she kicked him out last year." "No way," I said, surprised. "Maddie Ross?" "The same. She was one of the 8 girls we were all in love with in high school," Jack said, pointing to the bar. "She's over there, playing trivia with Geeter Scott. I saw her, still gorgeous, her black hair perfectly framing her face." I thought about saying hi but wasn't sure what to say. Jack must have sensed my hesitation. "Let's play trivia and grab a table near them," he suggested. Before I knew it, we were sitting nearby. I sent a picture to their table. The waitress smiled mischievously and said, "Good luck," making everyone laugh at my attempt to impress. I watched as the waitress delivered the drinks. Maddie smiled politely while Geeter whispered something to her. The guys nudged me to go talk to them. Nervously, I got up and walked over, sweating and feeling like a teenager again. Geeter saved me from saying something awkward. "Jim Spellman. If you're buying drinks, you should deliver them yourself," he joked. I smiled shyly. "I wasn't sure if you'd remember me." "Of course, we remember you," Geeter said with a laugh. "I thought you were married." I raised my left hand. "Divorced, 6 months ago." "Sorry to hear that," Geeter said as Maddie straightened up. I noticed Geeter's wedding ring. "You're married?" "Yes, 5 years now. I married Kevin Carlson, and we have twin daughters," she said. "I have a 10-year-old son and a newborn daughter," I replied. "A newborn?" Maddie asked, surprised. "Yes, I found out she was mine after my ex left me for someone else." Maddie looked stunned as Geeter said, "That's quite a story." I smiled. "Maybe for another time. Trivia's about to start, right?" Maddie nodded. "We never miss it. Want to join us?" I hesitated. I came with some friends, but I'll check with them. As I walked back to my table, Jack joked, "Go get her, Tiger," making everyone laugh. I glanced back at Maddie and Geeter, who seemed to be talking. Taking a chance, I returned and sat down with them. "Miss me?" I joked, making both of them smile. "We're counting on you not to mess this up," Maddie teased. "I'll do my best," I replied. Hours later, we were 2 points ahead of another team. The host asked the final question. This 1977 album features the hits "The Stranger" and "Just the Way You Are." I laughed as the ladies looked confused. I scribbled "The Stranger" on a piece of paper and handed it to the host, feeling confident. On my way back, I winked at them. "That was the easiest question of the night," I said, taking a sip of my beer. "Maybe for you," Maddie replied, shaking her head. "I don't even know those songs." Geeter laughed. "At least I know they're Billy Joel songs." When the host announced we had won, everyone cheered. Our grand prize? A bar gift card worth $10.50. I let the ladies use it for their tab. "It's time for me to turn into a pumpkin," Maddie said, smiling. "The babysitter's calling." I stood and asked, "Can I walk you out?" Both women smiled. "Please," they said. As we walked outside, Maddie took my hand, her eyes sparkling. I felt on top of the world. At her car, I kissed her hand and asked, "Can I get your number?" "It would be my pleasure," she said, entering her number into my phone. We made plans for dinner on Saturday and trivia afterward. Geeter laughed. "I'm still coming, you know." We all laughed as I kissed Maddie on the cheek and said goodnight. On Monday morning, I called my lawyer to report Carrie's threats. He reassured me, "Don't worry." Her lawyer faxed the signed agreement. Shared custody is now established. Congratulations. That night, I was surprised to find Carrie sitting on the steps with Jimmy and Allison. "What's this about?" I asked, noticing the casserole dish. "I brought dinner to help with Jimmy," she said. "Tuna casserole, your favorite." I smiled cautiously. "I've missed this. I can never make it quite the same." She sighed. "I should have called to offer it." "Oh wait, I guess I couldn't have called you." After dinner, Carrie sent Jimmy to his room and handed Allison to me. As I held her, I marveled at how much I had missed. Carrie seemed hesitant. "I've accepted the visitation and child support agreements," she said softly. "And what about, you'll never see your kids again?" I asked, recalling her earlier threat. "I overreacted," she admitted. "I was desperate to get you back." I sighed. "I wish you had treated me this way before you left. Now it feels like you don't love me, you need me. I can't trust you anymore." Tears welled in her eyes, but I continued. "At least let's be friends for Jimmy's sake. He doesn't understand what happened. You cheated on me, left me, and got a restraining order because your lover told you to. I was never a danger to you or Jimmy." "Jim, I cut her off. You didn't give me a chance to fix things. You just fell for him." Tears streamed down her face as she sat silently. Allison stirred briefly, and I gently rocked her back to sleep. "Carrie, you had a choice," I said. "You chose him. You'll never convince me you weren't just trying to change your life. I can't believe otherwise." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry for everything. You'll never know how much. Can we at least try to make it work, for the kids?" I leaned back, relieved that Allison had finally fallen asleep in my arms. "We can be friends, Carrie, but I'll never be with you again." She nodded, her eyes still wet with tears. "I understand." After Carrie and the kids left, I texted Maddie, "Hi, just didn't want you to forget about me. Looking forward to Saturday." When she didn't reply immediately, I found myself pacing the house, checking my phone every few seconds. I started worrying that I had sent the message too soon. Dating again felt new, and I wasn't sure about the rules. Should I have waited longer? Was her silence a bad sign? My mind raced with questions, even though we hadn't had our first date yet. 10 long minutes later, my phone finally buzzed. Relief washed over me when I saw it was Maddie. "Hi, Maddie," I said, answering quickly. "Hi, handsome," she joked. "I'm not much of a texter, I prefer talking." "Oh, sorry about that." "No need to apologize." "What are you up to?" she asked. "Just giving my little one a bath," I replied. "I knew you had an older son, but I didn't know about the baby." "Yeah, I've got two. Jimmy is 10, and Allison is a newborn." "3 kids wouldn't scare me," she said. "You know I have 2 of my own." "Really? That's great. I don't think I've seen you at any school events." "I had a terrible schedule before, working the second shift at the hospital. I just recently switched to the first shift." "Oh, that makes sense. I remember you mentioning you're a nurse's assistant." "Yeah, that's part of what ruined my marriage," she sighed. "Well, actually, my ex-husband's infidelity did. But he blamed my job." "I'm sorry to hear that. It sounds a bit like my ex. She used to say I worked too much, was too tired, the usual." We both laughed for a moment. "That's just nonsense," Maddie said. "They cheat and then blame everything but themselves. They justify it and hurt everyone around them. Do you know how many chances I had to cheat? But I couldn't do that to my partner. The ones who cheat just don't care." "Yeah," I sighed. "Carrie is still trying to get me back. She's got my son, my daughter, and even her parents against me. I think they're finally seeing that I'm the one suffering here." "We're the ones who suffer, Jim. Have you tried therapy yet?" "No," I admitted. "You?" "Yes, it helped a lot. I'll give you my therapist's name. She helped me get past the 'wow, this is me now' phase." "You're still in it." "You're way ahead of me," I said. "At least you've realized you need to move on." For a long time, I just stayed home, feeling stuck, until I finally decided I had to start living again, for the kids and myself. "Well," she said, softening her tone, "I think we make a good pair." I laughed. "That's for sure. I've been looking forward to Saturday ever since you kissed me on the cheek." "Oh," Maddie said suddenly, her tone changing. "I have to go, something's wrong with my 3-year-old. She's crying." "No problem. Talk soon," I said, smiling as I hung up. I sat back, feeling hopeful. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. When Saturday finally arrived, I called my sister. "Hi, Jim." Jenny answered cheerfully. "Jenny, do you have time to go shopping with me this morning? I need to update my wardrobe." "Oh my God, you have a date, don't you?" she teased, laughing. I chuckled. "Yeah, I'm going out with Maddie tonight." "Maddie Ross? Wow, she's gorgeous. I heard Steve really hurt her when he cheated. He even called her a witch, is that true?" "Don't be silly, big brother," she said, still laughing. "Of course, I'm free all day. Let's do lunch at the mall and then shop." "Sounds great," I said. "Let's meet at Red Robin at noon." As we sat in the restaurant, Jenny looked at me curiously. "So, Mom's thrilled to be a grandma again. She's crazy about Allison and visits her at Jane's house all the time. Carrie's even left her with her mom a few times too." "And how are you handling all of this?" she asked, softening her tone. "Better. Carrie has finally stopped fighting, and I'm really enjoying my time with the kids." Jenny nodded. "I wasn't expecting you to meet someone that night, it's almost overwhelming. I honestly thought she might turn you down." Jenny smiled mischievously. "Just be yourself, Jim. If you try too hard or fake anything, she'll notice, and it'll ruin things. You're a good guy, just use that. Thanks, Jenny. I guess I'm nervous because I feel out of practice. What do people even do on dates nowadays? She laughed. Jim, Maddie's our age, not in her 20s. Just do what you used to do with Carrie, dinner, a movie, maybe a bar with some dancing. Something low-key. She'll enjoy that. You're right, I agreed. Maybe I'm not as lost as I thought. Jenny smiled. Oh, you're still lost, but not completely hopeless. We both laughed, and I shook my head as we continued chatting. That evening, I walked up Maddie's driveway. A boy was playing basketball and tossed the ball to me when he saw me. I had to drop the flowers I was holding to catch it, which made him laugh. I guess you don't like flowers, I joked. The boy grinned. They're for Mom. She loves flowers. They're sturdy, I assured him, brushing them off. Inside the house, there were toys everywhere and DVDs stacked near the TV. The boy, David, ran upstairs, and a little girl peeked around the corner holding a sippy cup. She froze when she saw me, screamed, and ran upstairs. David came back down, carrying her. Sorry, he said softly. She doesn't like strangers. You scared her, he added. I shrugged it off. Don't worry. My daughter is the same way. Just then, Maddie appeared at the top of the stairs, looking stunning in a long skirt and a loose blouse. She took the little girl from David and smiled at me. This is David, she said. He goes to school with your son, Jimmy. Jimmy Spellman? David asked excitedly. Cool. He ran off, thrilled by the connection. Maddie touched the head of her middle child. This is Samantha, but everyone calls her Sammy. Nice to meet you, Sammy, I said, smiling. And this little one, Maddie continued, gesturing to the shy girl in her arms, is Bella. She'll need some time to warm up to you. She's not a fan of new people, as you can see. I wiggled my fingers at Bella, but she buried her face in Maddie's chest, still wary. My mom is running a little late, Maddie explained. She'll be staying overnight, so we'll have the evening to ourselves. I nodded, wondering if that meant we wouldn't be in a rush to end the night. No pressure, she added. We have plenty of time. Want a beer while we wait? Or maybe a glass of wine? A beer sounds great, thanks, I said. Maddie set Bella down, and the little girl quickly ran upstairs to join her siblings. You have a lovely family, I said, handing her the beer. Thanks. They're a handful, but they're good kids, she replied, sitting on the couch. I looked around the room and adjusted a cushion. One thing I've learned about having kids is no matter how clean you try to keep the house, someone is always making a mess. Maddie laughed. You're absolutely right. So, you and Steve got married, huh? I asked. That wasn't expected. You two were inseparable in high school. She laughed. We weren't together for love. We were part of a group of friends, and everyone paired up. It just happened that we lasted until graduation. Then, when I got pregnant with David, we did what was considered the right thing and got married. It wasn't a love story, it was doomed from the start. I nodded, taking a sip of my beer. Before I could respond, Maddie glanced at her watch. We should probably head out soon. I don't want to be late for our reservation. I smiled. Don't worry. We have plenty of time. She laughed softly. Jim, you don't need to be nervous. I've been looking forward to this all week. She gave me that bright smile again, the one that made her eyes sparkle and my heart race. Me too, I admitted. Honestly, I thought you might change your mind. Not a chance, she said. Unless you've turned into a jerk since high school, I wasn't going to let this opportunity pass me by. I laughed, relieved. I'm glad you didn't. Just then, the front door opened, and Maddie's mom walked in. Sorry I'm late, she called out, smiling as she entered. No worries, Mom, Maddie replied, standing up. Mom, this is Jim Spellman. We went to school together. Her mom smiled warmly at me. Nice to meet you, Jim. Take good care of my favorite daughter, or I'll come after you. I laughed. I thought that was the dad's job to say. Her smile faltered for a moment. He passed away last year. I'm so sorry to hear that, I said softly. She waved it off. Don't worry about it. Just have a good time tonight, though not too good, she added with a wink, making us both laugh. Maddie kissed her kids goodbye, and we left. As we walked out, her mom chuckled from the door. When we arrived at the steakhouse, Maddie and I settled into a table by the window. It felt perfect for a casual yet meaningful evening. But just as we were getting comfortable, something unexpected happened. 2 tables away sat Danny and Jane, my ex-in-laws. Seeing them made my stomach tighten into a knot. I wanted to leave, but Maddie noticed my discomfort. What's wrong, Jim? She asked. I sighed and gestured discreetly. My in-laws are here. 2 tables away, I said quietly. She looked back, and as soon as she did, they saw us. I braced for an awkward encounter, but I had nothing to worry about. Both of them smiled and walked over to our table. Hi, Jim, Dan said, patting me on the back. Good to see you here. Who's the beauty? He asked, smiling as Jane held his hand. I smiled awkwardly. Hi, guys. This is Maddie, my date. Maddie, these are my ex-in-laws, Dan and Jane. Jane smiled warmly at Maddie. Maddie, he's a great catch. Don't let him go like my silly daughter did. Maddie looked stunned, her eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. I'm not sure what to say, she stammered, clearly flustered. Dan laughed. Don't say anything. Just enjoy your evening. After they left, Maddie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Well, that was something, she said, half laughing, half surprised. They're good people, I said, relaxing. When Carrie tried to scare me by saying she'd take the kids and never let me see them again, they stood up for me instead. Maddie raised an eyebrow. Do you really think it was an empty threat? I'm not completely sure, I admitted. I think it crossed her mind, and she said it out of desperation. But I'm not dwelling on that. She signed the custody papers, and that's what matters. Maddie gently squeezed my hand. Good. Don't forget what she put you through, but for the kids' sake, try to get along. They'll pick up on any tension. But never trust her completely. I nodded, appreciating her advice. When the waitress came over, I decided to do something kind. Could you send a couple of desserts to that table? I asked, pointing at Dan and Jane. The waitress smiled, writing it down. Maddie smiled at me, clearly impressed. We continued our dinner, sharing stories and laughing, and afterward, we headed to the bar for trivia night. When we arrived, Geeta was already saving us a table, and Jack and the guys were there too, giving me thumbs-ups when they saw Maddie. I couldn't help but feel proud to be with her, her laughter was infectious. So, where did you guys go for dinner? Geeta asked curiously. The steakhouse, Maddie replied. You won't believe this, but his ex-in-laws were there, and they came over to our table. Geeta's eyes widened. Oh no. What did you do? Nothing, Maddie said with a laugh. They were actually really nice. They told me not to let him go like their daughter did. Wow, Geeta said, shaking his head. First date of the year, Jim. You ready to defend our title? You bet I am, I said confidently, glancing at the elderly professors we had beaten last week. One nodded at me, while the other made a throat-slashing gesture as if to say they'd beat me this time. I grinned, always enjoying a bit of friendly banter. "Well, we got lucky with that Billy Joel question last week," Maddie teased, nudging me. "Don't worry, ladies. We've got this," I said. And we did. By the final question, we had a solid 10-point lead. The host tried to shake us up with a tricky 12-point question about a country singer, but it was one of Geeter's favorites. She nailed it, securing another victory for our team. After trivia, we walked Geeter to her car. Maddie and I were wrapped in each other's arms. It felt so good to hold her, and I didn't want to let her go. "Good night, guys," Geeter said, giving Maddie a hug and surprising me with one too. "Drive safe, honey," Maddie called after her. Maddie turned to me, her eyes sparkling again. "It's still early," she said playfully. "You've got two options: take me home, and we can talk, or we can go to your place and have a little more fun." I wasn't going to ruin this moment. I took her to my house. Once inside, I offered her a drink. "Would you like some wine?" "I have red, white, or beer." "White wine sounds great," she said, settling on the couch and slipping off her shoes. I grabbed the bottle of Pinot Grigio I had bought earlier, hoping for this exact moment. "Here you go, Mads. My favorite wine for my favorite girl." "Mads?" she asked with a smile. "What, too soon for a nickname?" She laughed, clearly delighted. "No, it's not too soon. My dad used to call me Mads." "Oh," I said, feeling slightly awkward. "I didn't mean, stop," she said warmly. "It's fine. My dad would have liked you." I smiled, sitting next to her and casually sliding my arm around her shoulders in what I hoped was a smooth move. "Nice try," she joked, laughing again. "Don't overdo it." "I've waited a long time to find someone like you," I said, "and now that I have, I'm looking forward to dessert." We kissed, but nothing more happened that night. We waited until our third date to take things to the next level, after a romantic dinner at a fancy place she had chosen. Back at my house, I poured her another glass of wine, and we sat on the couch, talking and laughing like old friends. Later that night, she leaned in and whispered, "Jim, show me your bedroom." As we walked to the bedroom, memories of the past year flooded my mind: infidelity, divorce, losing and regaining my son, Allison's birth. Now, with Maddie in my life, I knew I wouldn't let her go. We were two broken souls healing together. It was too soon to think long-term, but I was certain I wouldn't make the same mistakes. Maddie and my kids would come first from now on. As I drifted off to sleep, content and at peace, I could have sworn I heard her whisper, "I love you too."